Good afternoon. My name is Michael Yoshi James, and today I will be presenting world building, based on the book Building Imaginary Worlds: The Theory and History of Subcreation by Mark J.P. Wolf. Before we begin on world building, what Mark J.P. Wolf kind of describes in his book, let's just go over a little bit about who he is. He is currently a professor in communication at Concordia University. He has a bachelor's degree in film production, a master's degree in critical studies, and a PhD, and he has written an extensive, like an amazing amount of books on video gaming and world building, some of which include Abstracting Reality, Art, Communication, and Cognition in the Digital Age, The Medium of Video Games, Virtual Morality, Moral Ethics in New Media, The Video Game Theory Reader, and The World of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. That's amazing. Um, and yeah, he is currently married with three sons. Now, before we really get into world as Wolf describes it in his book, we have to get down some things first, some vocabulary, some terminology, some jargon that he uses a lot, some of which include secondary worlds, second and secondary beliefs. After we go over what those two things are, we're going to go into storytelling versus world building, and then what really encompasses world building, such as the invention, completeness. So, secondary worlds are a very important thing in world building, and it comes up a lot in the first chapter of his book. So, basically, what secondary worlds are Mark has derived the term from Coleridge, which focuses on the terms of first imagination and secondary imagination. And in fact, that's kind of what we have to talk about first. Now, you see, imagination, in terms of what Wolf wants to describe it, uses Coleridge's terms of first imagination and second imagination, with the theory that imagination is some sort of divine right given us to us by God. So, first imagination is our ability to take in the sensory things around us and make it into something that we can understand. For instance, the things that you see, the things that you hear, the things that you feel, those things are then taken in, but we don't quite understand them. Then the first imagination creates concepts out of it so that we can think and understand. So you see a rose, it's red with green petals. That's your first imagination coming to play. Second imagination, however, is you then taking the things in your first imagination and then crafting them as you would. So you would take a rose and you would then imagine things about it. You would then, all right, maybe this rose is from a distant land. So secondary worlds are a very important thing in world building, and it comes up a lot in the first chapter of his book. So basically, what secondary worlds are Mark has derived the term from Coleridge, which focuses on the terms of first imagination and secondary imagination. And in fact, that's kind of what we have to talk about first. Now, you see, imagination, in terms of what Wolf wants to describe it, uses Coleridge's terms of first imagination and second imagination, with the theory that imagination is some sort of divine right given us to us by God. So, first imagination is our ability to take in the sensory things around us and make it into something that we can understand. For instance, the things that you see, the things that you hear, the things that you feel, those things are then taken in, but we don't Great. So now that we have the jargon out of the way, let's talk about storytelling versus world building and the importance of how building imaginary or secondary worlds is as compared to just storytelling in general. Now, as you see on screen, there are two different kinds of stories that are being told here, more or less. Whereas when you're doing storytelling, you're focusing more on the character and the plot. Harry Potter is trying to become a wizard, and the world around him matters a little bit less than his quest to defeat Voldemort and live a happy life. The world building is done more or less to advance the story. We hear about the Whispering Woods, we hear about Hogwarts, we hear about the other schools, but they're really only there to advance Harry's story. The world as a whole is more or less a background to Harry's journey through it. Now, this is a stark contrast to world building for the world building, whereas it focuses more on the things that make up the world. The narrative that focuses on world building focuses more on the world itself. So Star Wars had this expansive, sprawling universe, and so was Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. We had in the latter Okay, great. Now that we have a distinction between storytelling narratives and world building narratives, let's go into what makes up a world. So, as stated before, world building is focused more on the creation of the world, how vivid it is, and what makes it pop. Wolf states very intensely how worlds are a completely different monster. So you have to sit there. Like certain things have to be present. Certain things have to be adhered to or make a vivid world that people believe in, that seems real. And things that need to make this imaginary or secondary world that's both believable and interesting are invention, completeness, and consistency. Now, these are actually big topics. Um, but to start it off, invention is needed in order to separate the secondary world from the primary world. Now, on that, the primary world, as you know, is the world that we live in, the world created by God, the world that we inhabit, me talking to you, you reading this slide. And the secondary world is the world that the authors create. Now, in stories, worlds can be created, going back to Tolkien again, like Star Wars, completely fantastical worlds where magic exists, where completely different races like elves and dwarves, completely different languages like Elfish, Dwarvish, orcs exist, evil high demons exist, worlds like this exist, and that's requires a lot of invention. Then we have the flip side, like narratives like My Sister's Keeper, where it's just set in a normal world and focuses on really real things. The difference between these two is one has a lot more invention, whereas the world of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings has completely different races, languages, and existence. Whereas World of My Sister's Keeper is just normal people living in a place that we can already know. My Sister's Keeper is set in the primary world. Not many different things were changed, whereas Lord of the Rings has almost everything in the invention category over here. And for invention, there are different forms. So nominal invention makes changes to names to things that already exist. So for instance, cars could be called something else, trains could be called something else, pens could be called something else. Not much has changed other than the names that have been placed. Things are named. So things like this can be set in the far future, distant past, or like set in the present, where things just so happen to go change, be named differently. Cultural invention is the creation of different human objects. It's pretty much in the name, different cultures. So you can set it in primary world, but what you change is you create a new race of people, or you create a new city, you create a new idea, new religion, new culture, something along those lines. Natural inventions are things that completely change the perception of the world. As we go on, we're getting more and more drastic changes to the primary world. So we have Okay, now that we've gone over secondary worlds, secondary beliefs, what makes up a secondary world, what makes up a secondary belief, how they come to be, and what makes them good, there are a few things that slip through the cracks. Now, the first thing is Tolkien and escapism. Now, Mark Wolf makes a lot of references to Tolkien throughout the course of his first chapter, and that's mainly because Tolkien is a very big influence. Tolkien talks about what critics of world building refer to as escapism. Now, of course, there's going to be critics in every profession, but for escapism, critics of world building have said that anything that differs from the primary world seems unrealistic, which Mark claims, which is to miss the point of most secondary worlds. He goes on to say, while secondary worlds may represent strange and fantastic alternatives